Unique in their beauty, the landscapes of the Podilskiy Tovtry National Nature Park are mostly formed of deep canyons. There are many such canyons situated in the Transnistrian part of the Tovtry Park. The Smotrich Canyon is a deep, narrow valley of the tributary of the Dniester River. Its deep 50-meter-high slopes stand out for their unique outcroppings on the surface of late Silurian limestone. Constant and seasonal waterfalls running from its steep slopes fill the Smotrych River with underground waters. Today, its bed in the canyon is no more than 15 meters in width. And during the Middle Ages, the Smotrich overflowed the canyon within 2 hours. The coherent dam system regulated the level of the river. It was a natural, virtually unsurmountable obstacle for any enemy that had the courage and audacity to try to storm and seize the legendary Kamyanets-Podilsky Fortress. The Smotrych River very reluctantly flows into the Dniester. The twists and meanders created by the river form an unusually interesting landscape. Its valley is an exfoliation covered with shrubs or steep forested slopes. If you take a careful look at the Dniester and Smotrich rivers from a bird's-eye view, you get the impression that there are several rivers flowing into one another, and each one by their own canal. In truth, there are only 2 rivers, but they flow in such a twisting way that they create some kind of an optical illusion. The canyon is an environmentally protected national strategic site of the Podilskiy Tovtry National Park. Its steep slopes, not conducive to economic development, are protected by the reserve. The rock steppe and shrub vegetation is highly developed here. Many animals and plants inhabiting the Smotrych Canyon are listed in the Red Book of Ukraine and are of international strategic importance. The evergreen Shiveretskia Podolitsa is a symbol of the Podilskiy land. Its relic plant survived a glacier and exists to this day. While it is very rare in most of the territory of Ukraine, it is abundant in these places. The abrupt canyon slopes covered with evergreen Shiveretskia Podolitsa always reminds one of the summer season. In early spring, its slopes are covered with white lace. Its Shiveretskia in blossom, its beautiful white flowers, take the form of umbrellas. While this plant may seem to extremely vulnerable and unprotected, it is so strong and viable that its image actually inspired somebody to create a legend about it.
Колись в цих краях жила молода пара, хлопець і дівчина.
Once upon a time, a young couple lived in these lands. A boy from a wealthy family fell in love with a poor girl. Despite his parents' prohibition, he did not want to part with her for any reason. One day, the boy and the girl were sitting here on the steppe and were sweet talking. Servants, sent by his father, were staking out the lovers. When the girl turned and saw them, it was too late. She realized that her time had come, and she immediately jumped off the cliff. The boy jumped after her, and even in their last flight, the lovers wanted to be together. The following spring, white flowers of the Shiveretskia plant bloomed.
А на другий рік весною розквіли білі квіти Шиверекії.
They were reminiscent of a bridesmaid gown, and yellow flowers bloomed next to them, and they grow together, Shiveretskia Podolitsa and Aurinia Sexatilis, as a symbol of a young couple that did not want to live without one another, during life and after their death.
Молодої пари, яка не хотіла розлучатися ні за життя, ні після смерті.
Flower on the Stone was a romantic name for the city, which appeared on the high rocky peninsula over the canyon of the Smotrych River. Here there is a special atmosphere of the Middle Ages, a harmonious unity of the picturesque nature and impregnable walls of the outpost. The Kamyanets-Podilsky Fortress is truly one of the wonders of Ukraine.
Отож, місто унікальне в Європі.
The city is considered unique in Europe thanks to its location. Indeed, Kamyanets-Podilsky was built on a rocky island with an area of 121 hectares, which was a fortification. Therefore, it is not surprising that people have settled here since ancient times. People on the ancient Trypillian civilization were the first to settle on this rocky island. Then, in the 8th century, the island was favored by tribes of the Tiber.
Тут поселилися в 8 столітті нашої ери на Поділі Тіверські. племена.
Over 650 years, the city served as the main military administrative center of the ancient Rus and Lithuania principalities, then of the Podolsk voivodeship and the vicegerency. In the early 19th century, Kamyanets became the center of the Podolsk province with the Russian Empire. There are several theories of the city's origin. The most probable official version, according to which Kamyanets was founded in the 14th century by the Lithuanian princess Tovtry. Although nobody has doubts about the fact that such fortifications appeared in Kievan Rus. During excavations, a layer of remnants of incinerated kitchenware and other household items of Kievan Rus were discovered. Most probably in the 12th century there was a wooden fortress with earthen ramparts, which in the middle of the 13th century was burned together with the city by the Golden Horde.
When
the possession of this land passed into the hands of Lithuanians, they began to build city fortifications, and probably then the first stone fortress appeared. It was much smaller and located in the western wing of the castle. The fortress became the main symbol of the Kamyanets, without which it would be impossible to imagine this city. 11 towers, united by powerful fortress walls of thickness from 3 to 6 meters, served as a solid defense of the city and its residents. The towers were different. Each of them had its own name and unique history. One of the towers, named the Day Tower, was not appealing from the outside, though it was the oldest one. It was in the depths of the castle yard, the farthest from the entry gate. Now we're in the western wing of the fortress. Here the construction began. The oldest tower, probably built by the Lithuanians, was the next project. In the 14th century, it was called the Day Tower. The thickness of its walls was up to 6 meters. Instead of a traditional roof, a pyramidal spike was installed on which a watchman was on duty. His task was to keep watch over the constant movement of the Tatar soldiers beyond the Dniester River. The devastating raids of the Tatars on the land of rich Pospolita caused major damages. Small horde detachments crossed the river, dispersed and almost immediately entered the villages freely, pillaged houses and took into captivity women and children. For this they were called people catchers. At that time, human slaves were in high demand on markets in Istanbul and brought very high profits. This terrifying dark chapter in the history of Ukraine is today in the distant past. It is only the Kamyanets towers that remind us of those tragic events in our history as direct witnesses and participants. In front of me there stands a tower, which was built by one of the last German engineers in 1544. It is pentagonal in form and 2-storied in height. Cannonballs were immersed in the tower. It seems that they got stuck in the fortress walls. The German engineer wanted to show how strong and impenetrable the tower walls were. The first descriptions of the castle, built in 1472, clearly showed that this edifice served exclusively as a military defensive construction. There were no residential premises, only administrative ones. A service house for the commander with rooms for guards and servants, and warehouses of weapons and ammunition. No one ever lived in the fortress. There were only military constructions. Even a place for a high nobleman was not built here. Until the 18th century, soldiers lived in apartments of local residents, which caused their owners major inconveniences. Putting up soldiers was a form of punishment of the local people. The fact is that the soldiers ate practically all the food of poor families. To add to that, despite the physical abilities of the head of the household, the size of his family increased every year. It was only in the 18th century, when barracks were built to give the soldiers and officers a permanent place of residence, that the local residents breathed a sigh of relief.
солдати служили в казармах гарнізону.
One can taste the spirit of the medieval Kamyanets-Podilsky Fortress and its bread that saved its defenders from starving and gave them the necessary strength. Today, the recipe of the field bread and the construction of the old stove for baking bread are analogues to those of 300 years ago.
Отож, зараз ми знаходимося також біля такого цікавого пристрою.
Now we're standing next to a very interesting device. It is a mobile, on wheels, molded from clay with straw. It's a so-called stove.
Це так званий п'єц, як нас кажуть на Поділі, це слово польського походження.
Up until the early 19th century, bread was baked in this stove that is quite different from today's bread and form.
Хліба в такому виконанні, як ми їх
Medieval bread looked like a cake. In the Polish language, it is called a pliatzok. This cake was baked on the oven walls and served together with the first and second dishes. In addition to the independent bakery, there was a small brewery in the fortress. Beer was also served to the table for lunch. Soldiers were allowed to imbibe light alcohol, but not to a drunken state. The Kamyanets-Podilsky Fortress was not only the eastern gateway to Europe, but also the border between the Christian and Muslim worlds. For this reason, the religious leaders of Rich Pospolita gave special importance to defense of the city and invested funds in it. For example, at the beginning of the 14th century, Pope Julius II even gave a church tithe for the restoration of the 4 towers of this great fortress. For this reason, the towers of the fortress were called papal in those times. The fortress was rebuilt 9 times. Also, the city's fortifications were constantly modernized and strengthened. Engineers that were invited from Western Europe introduced their latest developments in fortification. This was a matter of state prestige for Rich Pospolita. For centuries, the city was virtually unassailable, and the fortress was practically impenetrable by attacking enemy forces. But military science and weapons did not stand still. Long-range artillery continued to develop. The high medieval castle towers could no longer provide reliable protection of the fortress from firearms. On the contrary, they became targets for the enemy. It was convenient to shoot the towers, and the fortress walls became easier to destroy. In short, the fortress became vulnerable for the first time in its long history, and in 1672 Kamyanets could not resist the 200,000-strong army of Turkish Sultan Mehmet IV. The long-range artillery which fired grenades appeared. In addition to that, the city's fortifications no longer played a key role in its defense. Under the pressure of bombardment by heavy firearms, the occupants of the fortress were forced to abandon it and capitulate the entire city. 27 years of Turkish rule left its trace. The new owners rebuilt the destroyed fortress with the help of French engineers. In the present day Kamyanets-Podilsky, one can clearly see the traces of Turkish and Muslim architecture, for example, in the fabulous St. Peter and Paul Cathedral. During the Turkish occupation from 1672 to 1699, the cathedral was used as a mosque. 2 minarets, eastern and western, were built from above. One of the minarets stands behind me. It is 36.5 meters in height. A servant of the mosque, known as a muezzin, had to climb 138 steps to reach the top of the minaret. 5 times a day, he ascended to the top to summon all Muslims in the city to pray. When the Poles returned to the city, the eastern minaret was demolished and the western one served other purposes. The 4-meter bronze statue of Madonna was covered with a gold leaf, and it is still on the top spire of the minaret. A special design ensures its stability. The statue, weighing 2.5 tons, sways like tumbler toy under a gust of heavy wind, but does not fall. The walls of the fortress remain indestructible to this day. Any invaders who came to power over the years were mainly interested in the protection and reinforcement of their outpost. By the year 1778, there were an impressive 224 cannons in its arsenal.
For
100 years, these lands were under the hegemony of Poland. What was Poland at the end of the 18th century? It was a river without banks. Its borders became narrow or wide. It was repeatedly divided and even torn apart among Austria, Prussia and Russia. In that same period of history, Ukrainian lands were an integral part of the Russian Empire. In 1793, Kamyanets-Podilsky officially became a part of the Russian Empire and later the center of the Podol province. After Bessarabia was annexed to Russia, Kamyanets-Podilsky was far from the empire's borders. The cities and its imminent stronghold lost strategic and defensive significance. To this day, these walls still remind us of the heroic history of an inexhaustible fortress on the Dniester River. So travel together with us to open for yourself new pages of undiscovered Ukraine.